All right, where were we? On woven fabrics. So, woven fabrics aren't as warm as knit. You can see in the knit fabric here, there's little pockets of air, and woven fabric doesn't have that. So that means that when the fabric is up to your body, it can't warm up those little pockets of air. So you would want to use a woven fabric for certain things and not others. So let's move over to knit. Knit, you can see that it has rows of loops, and these loops give it the ability to stretch. Woven fabrics only stretch if they're pulled against the bias grain. They don't exhibit stretch if they're pulling in the other way. So, one thing that you might see is that knitting by hand is gaining popularity. There's lots of places in the city where you can go to learn to knit. It's on trend right now. So most knits stretch more in the crosswise direction of the fabric, but they can stretch both ways. And if you're producing one t-shirt, let's say, you will want your t-shirt to stretch from side to side to go around the body, but you might not need it to stretch from neck to bottom. So you're going to want to put the stretch the right way, if that makes sense. The process where you knit is the same as in the industry, except knitting is done generally by a machine. So one row of yarn is knitted into horizontal rows, and then a row of loops is formed along the length of yarn, and the loops above and below interlock with each other to form a knit fabric. So jersey knit is the most common knit, and it's used for t-shirts, sweaters, dresses, pantyhose, and stockings. Purl knits, which have the same look on both sides of the fabric and stretch both lengthwise and crosswise, are best used for sweaters. Rib knits are used as the neck, wrist, and bottom bands on sweaters and jackets. And they have much greater elasticity because of the ribbed structure. Interlock knits don't stretch out of shape at all. They're used for blouses, dresses, and sometimes dressy t-shirts. And then double knits were popular back in the 70s. They're heavier and sturdier. So you can see that there's lots of different types of knits. There's weft knitting, which is what we spoke about just now. And warp knitting is different because the yarns are knitted vertically. So one yarn is used for each needle, and the fabric is constructed by looping the multiple warp yarns, so they interlock. So each loop has 2 yarns. Warp knitting is only an industrial process, so it's produced by a machine, and they are very strong and very fast. So let's look at non-woven fabrics just quickly. Fibers can be turned into fabrics without spinning first into yarn. This is called non-woven. So wool, polyester, viscose are all non-woven materials. They're basically layered and then arranged in some sort of random pattern, and then those fibers form a form of web. The fibers in the web must be bonded together so they don't pull apart. So people use a felting or a bonding process to do that. So you can see that there. They don't just stay that way on their own. So looking at fabric characteristics, this is a big activity. You've learned that fabric choice is determined by apparel and use. And some words that you would need to know in order to talk about a fabric are these ones. So fabric construction is how the textile is constructed. So that's what we just talked about with weaving, knitting, felting, bonding. Fabric hand refers to how it feels in your hand. So you might say, oh, that's a soft fabric, or that's a stiff fabric, or they're crisp. So when you touch and feel fabric, you learn how it behaves in your hand, and you can draw conclusions about what you like about it. Fabric weight is determined by the types of fibers, yarns, and construction to use. Fabric weight can range from being very light, such as chiffon, to very heavy, such as Melton cloth. And then the last one is fabric texture. It refers to the visual appearance of the fabric, so how it feels. It could be dull, smooth, rough, fuzzy, or prickly. So that's how it feels. It's different than hand because hand is how the fabric feels in your hand and how it behaves. Let's talk about fabric finishing. Once the fabrics have been constructed, they're called gray goods. So this is when you have a fabric, but it isn't cleaned and it hasn't been through the finishing process. Fabric finishing is very important, and these finishes add some sort of characteristic, or maybe they take away a characteristic. So a way that they might add something is they might add wrinkle resistance, or they could also be temporary, which lasts only 1 or 2 cleanings, or permanent. So there's lots of different things, so we're going to talk about a couple of them. Physical finishing is when a machine is used to alter the surface of a fabric. So maybe this is embossing or brushing, but the machine is doing something to change the way the fabric looks. Biological finishing is when you use bacteria and enzymes to change the fabric. So biostoning or biopolishing is an enzyme treatment used on cellulose fibers to produce a faded look to denim or a smoother fabric surface. So you might have some jeans that have had biological finishing on them. Another type is chemical finishing. So sometimes we make things flame-proof or water repellent, stain resistant, anti-static. A lot of the Mark's Work Wearhouse commercials, you can hear about how their clothing does this and that. That's usually done with a chemical. And lastly, is color and design. So dyes can be used to change a fabric. In the past, natural dyes were made from plants and insects, minerals, and shellfish. Sometimes the dyes were so expensive that there were laws that governed its use. So you may have heard that purple dye was so hard to come by and so expensive that they stated that only royalty could wear purple clothing. So royalty is associated with the color purple. But once synthetic dyeing was discovered in 1856, and P.S. it was discovered by accident, there was this whole new segment of the textile industry. So dyes can be added through different stages, not just at the finishing. They could be stock dyed prior to being spun into yarn. So this is when the fibers are just natural. After they've been cleaned, they can be dyed. You could also solution dye the fabric. So this is when the dye is added to a bath before the fabric is spun. You can piece dye something. So after the weaving or knitting has been done and before the fabric's been cut, you could dye it. And you can also dye a garment. So that's when a finished garment is dyed. So throughout the process of fabric printing, color is transferred onto the surface. So you may have done this in class before if you've taken an art or construction class with screen printing. You can do roller heating, heat transfer, printing, anything like that. Hand painting and tie-dyeing is also popular because it allows for creative self-expression, and usually these techniques are done on either a finished garment or a piece of fabric. We only have a couple more things to talk about in this unit, or in this activity, not this unit. And one is choosing fabrics. I want to finish off with this because some of you may be choosing fabrics for your summative. And it's really important that you consider the fabric and design when you have a textile product. So maybe you can think of something that you've bought that ripped or fell apart in the first week. If you buy a book bag, you have the expectation that the book bag will be strong enough to hold books. Or if you buy an umbrella, you have the expectation that it will protect you from being wet. So choosing fabrics is very important to make sure that the consumer has the proper expectation for what they bought. So a good textile product begins with choosing the right fabric for the product's end use, and the properties for the performance of the fabric need to match the function of the product, including the aesthetics. So last but not least, we have Textiles and Technology. I really think this is a cool image, and hopefully throughout this activity, you've seen how technology is used to create fashion products. And technology, just so we have a working definition, is both the mechanical and ideas developed to change their surroundings. So in the fashion technology industry, that is ideas and the actual doing of changing fashion garments or the way fashion tools or things like that. So science is used to develop or improve on things that might help us in the industry. So technology has enabled the process of fiber to be the production to be shortened, so it happens faster. And it also allows for the development of new types of fibers and yarns and fabrics, and it also enhances design, dyeing, and printing of textile fabrics. So if you are interested in tech and fashion can definitely work together. So that's it for Unit 4, Activity 1. We've talked all about the creation of the fashion fabrics, how certain fabrics are created, and next we're going to be talking about the construction of fashion.